I'm Dr. Clifford Lau. I do a little bit of everything. I teach chemistry and environmental science and been working with an environmental group, Beaver County Marcellus Awareness Community, and we have a project called Eyes on Shell. And as the name sounds, we keep eyes on shell. We have people in the community that report to us when they see something, smell something, hear something, and then we have our group of monitors and stuff that we can go out and take samples and measurements and determine what effect shell is having on our community. This is referred to as a cracker plant, but I like to call it a dehydrogenation plant. They take ethane from the Marcellus shale fraction, and then they crack it and change it into ethylene, and then they take the ethylene and purify it, and then they polymerize it into polyethylene, a single-use plastic. I have different health issues and do live in a lot of the pollution that Shell puts out is into the air, and the air gets all over the place, as we've seen with the smoke from the Canadian fires and stuff and other examples. So even though I don't live directly by the plant, their emissions will have an effect on the total quality of the air in southwestern Pennsylvania. And one thing that got me involved in it and teaching environmental science was that Pittsburgh or the southwestern PA is a non-attainment zone for ozone and for PM 2.5 particles. And so when we heard that there was going to be a plant constructed in this area that would add to those two things, seemed to me to be a little bit strange why they would allow that. If you're non-attainable, then you should be doing things to become attainable and not add to it and stuff. The EPA has certain numbers that you should have a yearly average. I forget, for like a 3-year average of PM 2.5 and a 1-year average and things like that. And on a routine basis, southwestern PA does not meet those averages. Now, supposedly we're no longer a PM 2.5 non-attainable zone because of the pandemic. We had the 2 years where industry had kind of gotten down and car traffic was reduced, and so it's an average. The impacts have a variety of problems, and another thing that is the fact that we have the VOCs that are given off, and of course they're bad for the production of ozone, which has all kinds of breathing problems and also with cardiovascular. And then we also have HAPs being given off, hazardous air pollutants such as benzene and acrolein and stuff like that are cancer-causing agents. And so you have those amounts. And again, none of them appear to be, very high that you'd have sort of OSHA regulations for them, but they are being emitted 24/7, 365 days a year. So it's having the people living in what I like to refer to as a chemical soup, that they're being exposed to low levels of this constantly, and it's not just one chemical, but there's a whole 53 different compounds that are called compounds of possible concern. I think they have so many acronyms, but I think that's so a variety of those are being, and very little toxicology has been done on looking at combinations. It's hard to try to test a variety of different ones. They usually test benzene or toluene or something like that, or acrolein by itself on, different living organisms to see what its effect is. But trying to do multiple ones and at what concentrations, and usually they can't have the study last for years in order to see what long-term exposure at low levels. So it's usually set for more what we call industrial exposure versus what we've been now talking to different people who make monitors for these types of atmospheric pollutants, and we come to look at what we call an industrial monitor is looking at something that you have a leak or something, so it's a relatively high concentration, versus an environmental monitor, which we're measuring lower levels but at a more continuous time frame. So every once in a while they do have a spike and stuff. We had an event back in April 11th to the 14th, where they dumped a whole bunch of what was called heavy liquids in their waste treatment plant that then got aerosolized, and there were foul smells all over the Beaver area and stuff when we went out and measured it and stuff. So, but they've had quite a few hiccups and violations like that. We have people referring to that they had, irritated eyes and throat. In fact, I was up there at 3 o'clock in the morning taking some measurements, and where I was located and measuring 200 parts per billion of total VOCs, I usually stay for about 10 to 15 minutes to get what's called a short-term exposure limit of steel. By the time I took my measurement, my throat was starting to feel irritated and stuff. So, well, it can, again, compromise any type of pulmonary disease that they might have. A lot of people, indicate that their asthma and stuff have been, seems to be exacerbated by the presence of the shell plant. Now, it's hard to correlate it because there's so many things that cause that, but again, it's kind of anecdotal, but it can't be good. I go more by just the general observation that we want to minimize our exposure to all these chemicals, whether we can prove that there's a direct cause or not, because it is hard to do that. But we know that just in general, exposure to these compounds by themselves is not a good thing to happen. That we had an incident sort of different from that, like the Neville Chemical had a emission problem, and the people in the Neville Island were complaining about irritation and coughing and stuff like that. We got the first notice from the Allegheny Health Department, said that they didn't know what the material was, but it wasn't harmful. And so my thing is, being a chemist, if I started having symptoms like that, I would leave the lab, close the door, and then try to find out what it is, not just, say, well, these are not that serious of events, because they can lead to more serious events. So, your body is usually pretty good at warning you when you need to evacuate or to shelter in place or something like that from these. And people shouldn't have to live like that they have this nice community and stuff and like to enjoy doing things outside and around them, living around their fellow neighbors, but yet a lot of people have considered moving and have moved out of the area because they don't want to be exposed to these things 24/7, 365 days a year. So, yeah, I'm probably taking a little bit of a risk, but again, I have someone that I go up, take the measurements. I do have a respirator handy for organic vapors, so there were times that we thought exposure was high enough, but I haven't yet had to use that. So, but then again, as I thought to myself when I took that measurement during the April 12th, was I sat there for only 20 minutes and I got to leave, but the people who live in Beaver and Vanport and the communities surrounding the shell plant, they don't have that option necessarily in the middle of the night to go out and maybe go visit relatives or something. You don't want somebody knocking at the door, so I have that option of vacating the area pretty easily. There are other things, and people want to have the plant because of jobs, but there are other types of jobs available that are related to renewables and green projects and stuff that could be used, instead of this. The other thing about the plant that is that we talk about the emissions from the plant, but the whole process of the fracking is a dirty process. It releases its own pollutants and things and contaminates water. And then this plant makes single-use plastics, but then also pollutes the oceans and things. So I like to say that this whole infrastructure is dirty from one end to the other, from beginning to end. And again, one of the things that I've talked about is the fact that in essence, we've got the extraction of the raw material, the processing of the raw material, the transportation of the raw material, the processing of the raw material in the cracker plant, and formatting of the product. All this is taking place not in one single plant. I've worked in chemical plants before, but all that happened in a very small area. that people would come to work and leave. Here, the people in southwestern Pennsylvania are having basically a chemical plant built around them, that all the different activities are, in several different counties, and basically they're living inside of a chemical plant, again, 24/7, 365 days a year, which doesn't seem like a safe thing to do, and unduly harms their health and their quality of life.